And then I will start admitting people. All right, it looks like we have admitted everyone that's here for right now. We will continue to admit as people are able to join us. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Cox. I am an assistant professor at Michigan State University. I am also the diversity chair for the Division for Autism and Developmental Disabilities through the Council for Exceptional Children. I am joined by two of our diversity liaisons today. Kayla and Guofeng are here with me. And then we have three wonderful scholars who are presenting today, Ruby, Libby, and Millie. Oh, there you are. You've moved on my screen, so sorry. They are Project Future Scholars, and they are working at Michigan State University as well as Penn State University through this collaboration. And Ruby is also our new DADD student representative. So they are very qualified to share information today about transition plans, and I am looking forward to learning from them. I am going to go ahead and turn it over. I think, Libby, you are going to share the presentation, and the liaisons and I are going to monitor the chat. So feel free to put questions into the chat, and there will also be 10 to 15 minutes at the end where we will invite you to ask questions then as well.
Yes, so we can introduce ourselves here. We're going to talk about transition planning in a lot of different areas today. We can start by introducing ourselves a little bit more. I'm Libby. I'm a first year PhD student at Michigan State, and I used to be a high school special education teacher and transition teacher for in Michigan, we call it CI or cognitive impairment classroom or like IDD, ASD classroom.
I'll go next. As Dr. Cox mentioned, my name is Ruby Humphries. I am the new DAD student rep. If you find yourself in Long Beach next week, please come and say hello. I'm very excited to meet everybody in person. I am a second year PhD candidate in special education at Penn State. My most important job is mother to 9 children, 7 of which have been served through IEPs and or 504s. In my previous life iteration, I've worked as a supports coordinator for MHIDD, as an inclusive preschool teacher, as well as an advocate for a crisis nursery, and have served as providing translation services in many different roles for many different agencies. And I'm really excited to share this evening with you.
Hi, and I'm Millie Rodriguez. I am a third year PhD candidate in special education at Penn State. I also am a former educator. I was a content area high school English teacher, and all my years teaching, I was also the co-educator in inclusive classrooms. I currently am working on research on transition for twice exceptional students. And it's deeply personal because I also have a child with neurodivergence, autism, and who has experienced this transition journey. Yeah, and that's me. So I guess the next slide, we'll just talk about the agenda. I just want to take a moment to orient everyone to how we'll spend our time together tonight. We're going to begin by grounding ourselves in the IEP, transition IEP process, what it's designed to do, and how it functions as a roadmap for long-term planning rather than single meeting or a forum. And then we're going to talk about family-school collaboration, focusing on how families and educators can work together so students feel supported, understood, and centered throughout the process. After that, we'll spend some time talking about preparing for post-secondary life, mostly focusing on post-secondary transition to education, but a little bit about independent living and work as well. And then we'll wrap up with some questions and conversation. We really welcome any questions you may have there. If you drop it in the chat, they will be answered as they come in. And if there's anything specifically for us, we can answer that at the end. And again, it's a community chat, and so it's supposed to be a community space, and your questions will really help us make that community. So the next slide is, let's see, that's Libby, right?
Yeah, sorry, my cat is meowing. So if you hear her, she's upset that I'm not giving her attention. Okay. So we are just going to talk through the transition IEP and what that looks like. I think we have a lot of educators here. So some of this might be repetition, but just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page about the transition IEP, this section of the IEP is added when students turn 16. That's mandated by the IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Some districts will choose to do that earlier than 16, but 16 is kind of that magic number for transition. So students with an IEP will have this section in their IEP once they are 16. A really big piece we want to emphasize here is that this transition plan is collaborative. We know that the IEP as a whole is collaborative with the IEP team. But we really, really want to emphasize this collaboration in the transition plan, especially because these are the students' lives and their futures. And the students and their families are really the people that are the experts in the student's day-to-day life. So we really just want to honor that collaboration, honor student voice and community support, and see how all those things can work together for effective transition planning. So we are going to kind of talk about the four main domains of transition that the whole transition plan is built around. These are kind of four areas of adulthood, if that makes sense. So the first one is post-secondary education, or education after high school. So that can look like a lot of different things. For some students, it might look like college, but for other students, it could be specific job training, a transition program that works on vocational skills or work-based learning. So it can look like a lot of different things, but whatever type of education the student's receiving after high school, that does lead to employment, which is the big one, getting paid for doing work. That's kind of what we're all here doing, is working. So that's a really big part of these four domains of transition. The other one is independent living. So this is the cooking, cleaning, personal care, financial literacy is big, being able to live and navigate the world independently. And then the fourth one is community participation, which is the fun stuff, going out, doing things, maybe not the fun stuff, going to the doctor, going to the bank, but also hanging out with friends, going to clubs, things like that. So these four domains are really important as we continue looking at the IEP. Depending on what state you're in, they might be worded a little bit differently, but these are kind of the main four that the IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, uses. So in my next couple of slides, we're going to talk through the components of the transition IEP, what's in this section of the IEP. I did leave the domains up in that left-hand corner for you guys to refer back to, because they are really the building blocks or the foundation for the transition IEP. So the first component is the transition assessment. So this is used to assess students' skills and identify strengths and areas for growth. This typically looks like a skill-based rating scale completed by the special education teacher and or the family or the student. And it looks at those four domains and specific skills that the student has and how independent they are with those skills. And this is updated annually to track growth, see where students are growing, and see where students still need more support. So with the results from the transition assessment, we get an idea of what the student still needs to work on, and then we can look at transition services and activities. So the main foundation for this section is students developing their post-secondary vision. And this is kind of the student's own section. This is the one that they own. They get to say what they want their future to look like. This might not be what the parents think the future should look like. It might not be what the teacher thinks. This is the student section to say, I want to live with roommates. And that's their vision. That's what they want to do. So they get to pick their own vision for each of those domains. This is not set in stone, just like any other 16-year-old says they want to work at McDonald's when they grow up. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So it's going to change every year. It might not even happen. Maybe they will live with roommates one day, maybe they won't. But as the IEP team, we're here to just support what their vision is, and that might change every year. So once they've developed this post-secondary vision, the IEP team can then identify services and activities that will help them work toward that vision. So this is not the same as like IEP goals, as you've heard of them. We will talk about those in a minute. These are more just experiences or specific skill building or maybe volunteer opportunities that the student can interact with to gain skills to work toward that post-secondary vision. It's more of a guideline of ideas of things to work on. And it's really just more showing what is the school going to do to help equip the student to reach their post-secondary vision in all of those areas. And then moving forward, there's also the annual transition goal, which is an actual IEP goal, like you've seen them in other areas like math and English. So once a student turns 16 and has a transition section in their IEP, they are required to have at least one IEP goal that is focused on an area of transition. So that can be any of those domains, but it is specifically about the student's post-secondary vision, and it is aligned with what the student is hoping for their future. This is a measurable goal. The data is tracked frequently and updates will be shared. So this is the more formal IEP goal that you have seen before, specifically for the area of transition. And then the transition plan also includes a course of study. This explains the steps that the student is going to take to complete their high school education. So for most students in general education and special education, their course of study looks like a high school diploma. So for most students, the course of study will outline classes they'll take and different requirements they need to meet to get that high school diploma. There are students with more significant support needs that will be working toward a certificate of completion instead of a diploma. And so their course of study will look a little bit different, and it will focus more on foundational math and reading skills, living skills, self-regulation and behavioral skills. So that looks different depending on whether a student is getting a high school diploma or not at the end of their 4 years. But either way, they do need to have a course of study outlined in that transition section. The transition section might also include other things that are relevant, like information about guardianship, whether that has been established or if it is going to be established. It might also include information about collaboration with community agencies. So sometimes members from community agencies like rehabilitation services, state services, things like that, will come to an IEP meeting to discuss options for the student to receive resources and supports. So there might be information about that. Also, necessary accommodations. I haven't seen a lot of that personally, but it is something that might come up in the transition section, and just other relevant information for planning that transition piece. So that's kind of a really quick transition IEP 101. Before I hand it over to Ruby to talk a little bit more specifically about the family, do we have any questions about what that transition IEP looks like logistically? Okay. If anybody thinks of anything, let me know. I know it can be confusing and like a whirlwind, so let us know if you come up with any questions, and I will pass it on to, I believe, Ruby.
I'm going to warn you in advance that my dog Fable has decided that she wants to be part of this community chat as well. So if you hear her, I apologize in advance. I'm going to be talking about speaking from the family perspective. So, as a parent, but also as an advocate and a researcher, transition is often presented as a checklist of services, but for us families, it's an emotional, relational, and systems level experience that unfolds over many, many years, not just at 14 or 16, but across, pretty much when our children enter elementary school and beyond. Families are not only navigating eligibility requirements and timelines, but they're also grappling with identity, belonging, cultural expectations. A lot of times we talk about this measure of success as independent living. Well, what does that look like in a cultural context? Because I know that for me in my culture, that wasn't a measure of success for my adult son who has a diagnosis of intellectual disability and autism. That wasn't a measure, and that wasn't necessarily an expectation of mine or of his. Many families accessing the right information, aren't really exactly sure sometimes about who to ask, what to ask, where to look for information, and so forth. And a lot of times there is a gap between the critical information that families really need to support those decisions, to help scaffold those decisions that their child is making in terms of their post-secondary options. There really is a disparity between what access to information some families tend to have dependent on area, school district, state to state. So my goal is to start a dialogue amongst families and caregivers where we can examine the questions and elements of transition that we don't often think to ask until it's too late, and to highlight how professionals can proactively share information in ways that are culturally relevant and accessible to families, that are responsive and that center the family priorities, not just the compliance component of the IEP. So I can move on to the next thing. Transition is a system and not a moment. So as we shared earlier, a lot of times, depending on state to state, so in Pennsylvania, transition starts at age 14, but families aren't really told that transition isn't just a meeting and it's not a form, that it's a long-term coordination of care across education, healthcare, employment, the continuation of benefits, adult services, and without intentional planning, students with disabilities often experience a service gap after high school, which obviously can really run a risk of derailing all of the scaffolding and support and that we've cultivated as children have traversed their educational landscape. Many families don't really know how to ask or who to ask, what supports their child will be eligible for after graduation, and who funds those supports. Because, as we know, when a child turns, well, after they graduate high school, so dependent on the state, 21 and 22, and IDEA no longer serves the student and ADA begins, things take a big shift and a big change. And there's a very long wait lists for adult services. And oftentimes, the families that I've had the privilege of working with, and myself as well as a parent who's supporting a child with more comprehensive and complex healthcare needs, I wasn't told about Medicaid waivers, what they are, what they could pay for, how long the wait lists are. A lot of families report not realizing that they have to reapply or help their support their child applying for SSI, Social Security benefits when they turn on their before they turn 18, because if they wait until they turn 18, then those services, that funding stops. And that the application process for something like SSI as an adult is oftentimes very different to the process for minor children, the qualifying criteria and so forth. Um, Families are often have shared with me in the communities that I have been a part of that they were unclear about housing supports, what might be available to help scaffold and support their child, lead a more independent life or live independently, such as CNA care, in-home nursing care, housekeeping services, and that these can be accessed and funded through Medicaid waiver services. In Pennsylvania, the offices for MHIDD, where I used to work, are a great place to start with getting on a wait list, with getting a supports coordinator who can help families navigate these systems. And again, as I mentioned, oftentimes parents have shared that there is a disparity amongst what they are told regarding available vocational rehabilitation, the offices of vocational rehabilitation services, or OVR, the supports that they can offer and funding that they can offer to help support those employment goals that our students have. I have a daughter who attends college who has a diagnosis of autism, and she receives OVR funds as a scholarship to help support that, her post-secondary goals. Um, which brings me to post-secondary education and IPSE. So it's important for families to know that disability supports in post-secondary education operate under a completely different legal and structural framework. As I mentioned before, in high school, everything is governed by IDEA, which places responsibility on the schools to identify students, to design individualized education programs, and ensure access to supports and services. But in college, that responsibility shifts almost entirely onto the student. The disability supports are governed by ADA and Section 504, and the services are coordinated through each individual institution's Office of Student Disability Resources or Disability Services Centers. These offices do not provide special education or individualized instruction. Instead, they offer reasonable accommodations, and it is for that student to individually reach out, make that connection with the Office of Student Disability Services to start the process and the disclosure of documentation to help support those supports that the university is able to offer. A lot of families are also surprised to learn that colleges are not permitted to communicate with parents without student consent. And as a parent or a caregiver support individual who has been very involved in that support and cultivation of their child, it kind of comes a little bit as a shock to say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean you can't tell me that? And of course, this is where I say that it's a life course goal, this, cultivating that resilience and that ability for students to be able to advocate for themselves, and with parent support in the background, because I certainly still support my adult children. Which brings me to, one more thing that I wanted to share was that in college, the universities and colleges will not modify course content or expectations. They will provide reasonable accommodations such as extended test time, changing when testing can be taken, flexibility. Some universities offer flexibility with attendance. And again, these are all things that need to be discussed with the support coordinator through the Disability Resource Center at each college and university. Which brings me to inclusive post-secondary education, or IPSE, programs within colleges and universities that are designed to support students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to participate in college coursework, campus life, and employment experiences along their neurotypical peers. These programs reflect a growing recognition that students with IDD belong in higher education and can thrive with supports that are thoroughly and thoughtfully designed. families play a huge important role in helping students explore IPSE options that align with their students' goals and strengths, because all IPSE programs vary in structure, level of inclusion, credentials that are offered, and cost and cohort size. So it's all of these things are really important to consider when families are navigating this IPSE space and considering that as a post-secondary opportunity. Some families have, a lot of us are wondering, well, who funds this? And some families have had great success with combining funding for IPSE through, if your student attends an IPSE that is funded through TIPSID funds, that are higher education funds by the Department of Education, for specific IPSEs that qualify and apply to become TIPSID IPSEs, then students are able to access federal Pell Grants to help with the funding to attend that IPSE. There are Medicaid waivers, as I mentioned before, that can help with that, different scholarships, and of course, family contribution. So all of these options are things that transition coordinators and teachers and, just, I guess, the IEP team should be aware of as an option to bring to the table as a concept to families. I know that for myself, I didn't know what an IPSE was until after I finished my master's degree. Move on to the next one. Post-secondary employment options that I wanted to talk about. So we know that the research states that post-secondary employment outcomes are strongest when career exploration moves beyond cookie cutter opportunities and moves beyond compliance-driven placements. While some options like campus dining or custodial work can provide valuable experiences for some students, they're not sufficient for every student and shouldn't be treated as a default pathway. Families play a really big role in advocating for work experiences that reflect their students' strengths, interests, cultural values, and long-term goals. When we align those goals with actual work experiences, that as the research says, and anecdotally, as I have seen and others have seen, it really creates a more longitudinal employability outcome that is really more favorable for students. And when families share what motivates their students, whether it's working with animals, technology, with people, hands-on tasks, or creative work, it helps schools design more relevant and motivating experiences for not just their student, but for other students that are coming along through the school later. Educators and transition coordinators are essential for cultivating community partnerships that expand employment possibilities. Millie and I are currently working with a rural school district, and a barrier that school district has faced is just transportation, and it really hasn't been explored as a concept. Finding community partnerships more local to that community, and we're working with them to help facilitate and scaffold that process. But things like that, reaching out, branching out, is huge. I wanted to move on to guardianship and decision making. So as students approach adulthood, it becomes necessary for families to consider whether guardianship is an appropriate choice for their child. Guardianship involves the removal of a person's legal decision-making rights and should be considered carefully. Less restrictive alternatives, such as supported decision-making, powers of attorney, or educational decision-making agreements, can preserve autonomy while still providing needed support. I listed a few links on that page. In particular, I will always push people towards Think College, thinkcollege.org, because they are a wealth of information for all things post-secondary and IPSE. There are some other websites that families have shared with me that have been great resources for them when navigating this landscape. And families, experts, and culture shapes transition experience. So parents, as Libby shared, and we all know their child's strengths and communication modalities and cultural values and support needs better than any professional who enters the picture later in their life. Sometimes families say that they feel like they are positioned as passive recipients of information rather than partners. And research demonstrates that outcome improves when families are treated as collaborators and decision makers. I urge families to never be afraid to advocate for their children. I would always advise families as well to join any parent support groups or agencies such as Parent to Parent who can act as cultural brokers to families, because being able to speak with someone who has walked that path before, and I'm sure that we can all here attest to that, any kind of mentorship that we've received in the past is huge with navigating new landscapes. That's like tip number one for me. And I wanted to talk about just a little bit more about culture shaping how families experience transition planning, and that it's not a culturally neutral enterprise. Language access, immigration status, race, disability, stigma, historical mistrust of institutions. Come here. I'm sorry. Um, all shape how families engage with schools and agencies. And finally, I'm going to say this really quick because she's been patient enough with me. Families just need educators who communicate early, clearly, explain systems with no judgments, see students as a whole, not as problems, and small actions like returning emails, explaining options, honoring family priorities. This all makes a meaningful difference in the trust and outcomes between families and school districts. So families don't need perfection. What they expect is a partnership.
And that's such a great segue to this next slide about supporting independence, because the entire community surrounding that student is so crucial in fostering independence and participation, especially for students with autism, who we know oftentimes have very high academic ability, but not very good socialization. So having that community in place empowers them to engage actively in their daily lives and in their communities. So for many autistic students, skill building happens through repetition, structure, and scripting that is taught explicitly. So practicing language, practicing routines and responses ahead of time supports confidence and independence later. So in this section, I'll be focusing a lot on scripts for conversations, routines, and responses so that expectations feel familiar before they're required, and the student can have that ready response or that ready response as soon as anything happens or is said. Uh, and I also want to talk a little bit more about what we mean when we're talking about independence. It doesn't mean, just living independently. It means developing skills that are skills that are practiced over time. And so the independent skills are manifested spontaneously. And these are skills that show up across education, work, and independent living. Um, and again, it just comes from repeated opportunities to try things, to reflect on what worked, and then adjust. It's not just the flip of a switch at graduation. And just like Ruby was saying earlier about how things change so drastically after high school, from eligibility or entitlement to eligibility, it's very important for the student to feel ready for that transition. And like Libby said, and like Ruby said, families are the people who see the real world version of their child. And so for educators, it's really important to trust the families, that even though they're not educators, they may not be educators, they know their child. They see how their child handles mornings, transitions, how they deal with their anxiety, their energy, their motivation, how they deal with overload and overwhelm, all the stuff that never makes it into that transition IEP. So that lived reality really matters when we're planning for transition. You see questions on the slide, and let me just make sure I'm in the same place. Um, so it's asking a question. When we ask questions like this, it encourages spontaneous thinking and helps students, especially students with autism, break out of their routines. We know that a lot of students with autism are rules bound and bound to their routines, so it really breaks it up when we force them to think about what is one thing they could do differently. So at home or at school, educators and families, pick one everyday routine this week to try in the classroom or at home. Mornings work great. Just ask one question after, maybe after school, say what part of the day felt easy today? What part felt hard? What would help next time? And forcing the student to think about what is going to help next time. Um, that alone builds self-awareness and it turns daily life into skill building. Um, and it's going to take work. If that student or that child is anything like mine, they're either going to say, I don't know, shrug, or not answer at all. But that repetition is what is going to help them build these scripts. So the next slide is going to talk more, that's where I'm talking more about post-secondary education planning. And post-secondary education is just one transition pathway. When we talk about the options, we're talking about a range. They could go on to work, go on to independent living with some supports, but with post-secondary education, it doesn't have to be college. It could be vocational training. It could be certificate opportunities. It could be micro-credentialing, or it could be a 2-year program at a community college or university. And so thinking outside of the box is where we really start to understand that post-secondary systems are important and where that there's a lot of opportunity for growth. And like Ruby said, and like I said before, sometimes we're caught off guard because of that and that eligibility. I know from my own personal experience and from my research that many of our students are ready academically, maybe not so much ready for the academic rigor. And especially for students with autism, they're not ready in other ways. A lot of post-secondary success depends on expectations that are rarely stated out loud, like that hidden curriculum of navigating college. And that's okay. So that's why we're talking about this now, right? So we can start thinking about what that hidden curriculum is. What do our students need to know when they're in college? Because college is more than just taking a test and getting an A. So having that repeated exposure to real expectations while offering support is so helpful. And when they do struggle in post-secondary educational settings, it's not because they lack ability, it's because that setting changed faster than the skill building did. And that's exactly what happened in my personal situation. My child went away to college and they just couldn't, their executive functioning skills, their organization, time management, they just were feeling overwhelmed all the time and couldn't handle it. And that was something that we didn't prepare them for. All their life we were talking about, okay, self-regulation and use your words, but we didn't really talk about that executive functioning aspect. And Ruby already talked about disclosing and following up. And it's really, let me think, it's a real shock when the students, when the schools are not, with the universities or colleges or whatever post-secondary setting the student is in, does not have to report to the parents, or the parents aren't allowed to call and say, hey, how's my kid doing? So that is another transition, not only for the student, but for the parent. And if the families all over the country in August, delivering their children to college are feeling, scared. How is my kid going to do at 18 years old, going to college for the first time, being away for this extended amount of time for for this first time? Imagine how our students feel. Again, many of them are brilliant and capable, but those executive functioning challenges are also often comorbid with depression and anxiety. So how do we get them ready for that? And that's why early practice matters, to help the students become familiar with the setting, with what they may have happened, what situations they will be in, what they will have to navigate when they're on campus or wherever that setting is for that post-secondary educational experience. So we practice now when the stakes are lower and when the adults around or the community around that student can coach them gently. This pattern happens over and over again. Preparation is best when it's gradual, reinforced, and grounded in real experiences. So what you can try at home or try at school is help the student practice various scripts. Keep it short. I learn best when I can blank. A support that helps me best is blank. Can we set up a plan for blank? And even emails to professors or to instructors help them practice those scripts like I need assistance with blank. And that will help the student know what to do when they're stuck. You're building the muscle memory of asking for help and the confidence that comes with it. And then the next slide for independent living skills, what to build. We're going to talk about specific skills that make life smoother. So if you'll switch to the next one, Libby. Oh, you did. Sorry. We're talking about skills students need to navigate adult systems. What all these skills have in common is that they're transferable. They show up in college, they show up in training programs, they show up in work and life, community life. So there are a lot of different categories here. I'll just give you a couple of examples. So for social skills, especially difficult for our students with autism, this includes things like greeting people. I remember when my child was young, maybe some of you know this too, when you're starting a conversation, follow the acronym GUESS. So greeting, make eye contact, say hello, smile. So just teaching these little things that will help our students with social skills, reading the room, how to handle awkward moments, and the most important, how to exit a conversation. That is something that my child did not know how to do. And so teach them some exit lines like, I'm going to take a quick break, or I'm going to step out for a moment, or I need a reset if they're dealing with some overwhelming feelings. For planning and time management, this is the hidden part of post-secondary life. Students in post-secondary education settings have to manage their syllabi, multi-step assignments, long-term projects and deadlines that are not repeated every day. So giving them a model of how to tackle these assignments, especially long-term ones, is really important. So help them understand, what does done look like? In one sentence, what does done look like? And then list 3 actions that can help them get there. And 3 actions, we know the magic number is 3 in a lot of different ways, even in writing, a series of 3. Communication and self-advocacy, this is very similar to, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about asking for help and how to communicate, helping them come up with a script for an email template, or maybe even creating one with them that they can just fill in the blanks and send it off to their instructor. Hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm working on blank, I'm stuck on step 3, blank, whatever. Can you clarify blank by telling me blah, blah, blah? And so again, teaching them those communication skills, those self-advocacy skills, helps them gain confidence and overcome that executive function. You probably are familiar with a student who reaches a certain step in a process and then just shuts down because they don't know how to get past it. Practicing these things will help them get past it. And I'm going to try and go through this really quick. Money basics, just, start with that basic money, recurring money responsibility, something like, here's your allowance. You can buy a snack, you can subscribe to something, buy a game, whatever. Safety and problem solving. Hopefully, most of the students that you're working with are like mine, where they don't take risks at all, but sometimes risk is good. So what should they be doing when plans change, when they miss the bus, when they lock themselves out of their dorm room, when they're overwhelmed or they need to make a safe choice, like their friends are going out to drink and they don't want to. So helping them come up with scripts, like I feel overloaded, and so what I'm going to do is blank. If I get lost, then I should blank. If something feels unsafe, then I should blank. So coming up with those conversations, scripts, and short plans of what to do. Transportation, I think we'll skip that because navigating a campus is really important, but that can happen when they visit the campus, or maybe if they are able to attend a summer bridge program, that would be really, really great. So transition planning gives us a chance to make those expectations visible and practice them early. So the next slide. How to support, teach, practice, and fade. So if you're an educator, especially a special educator, you're very familiar with this. It's very similar to explicit instruction. I do, we do, you do. So first, we model the skill. We make our thinking visible. We show how we plan, how we problem solve, and how we communicate. Like, I'm checking my calendar. I'm planning some buffer time. I'm going to write the email now so I don't forget. All of these think alouds helps the students understand, oh, this is what I should be thinking. This is how we think when we're navigating our day. It's not just all silence all the time. Although I think my kid has Toho music in their head all the time. And then we practice together, co-plan schedules, co-write emails, talk through decisions, doing it side by side, making sure it's calm. Don't rush through, treat it like a rehearsal. And then over time, fading those supports. This is the hard part. This was the hard part for me. It's the hard part for all loving parents, but the fade is where the confidence grows. You're not just throwing them out there and seeing if they can fly. You're stepping back intentionally and letting the students take more ownership. So maybe you stop reminding about an appointment or about something that's coming up. Maybe you stop checking their academic portal every day. Maybe you let them check their own calendar and see what assignments are coming up. And when things don't go perfectly, because of course they won't, we reflect instead of rescue. So we allow those natural consequences, like getting late points taken off for a missing assignment, but we have those safety nets in place. We know that they're going to get points. They just, because they have their accommodations or whatever, but we have an opportunity to talk. What happened? What was the plan? What can we try next time? But most importantly is no shame, no lecture, just a discussion. So missing a deadline can mean a lower grade, but it doesn't mean losing housing or losing medication or losing safety. We just need to make sure that they are getting the support that they need while growing. And then the last one is small steps now, more choices later. Let's just zoom out. Transition planning is strongest when skills are introduced early and reinforced across over the years. Families and communities play a central role in shaping transition goals because we get to know our kids. We see their lived realities better than anybody, and families know what drains them, what motivates them, what calms them, what overwhelms them, and what helps them recover. And when we're talking about readiness, after high school, whether it's college work or independent living, success grows from repeated opportunities to practice independence with guidance and support. So again, if you take nothing else, the thing that I've been repeating over and over again, choose one skill this week, practice it, and then next week, pick another skill, practice it, fade the support, but keep circling back to it, keep reflecting together. This is how you build independence with care. And that's how students learn later that they have options and can hopefully persist to completion, whatever it is that they choose to do. And also making sure, instead of asking, is my child ready for independent living? Is my child ready for college? What experience would help my child feel more prepared? That's the question we should ask. So for the next slide, Q&A, we just want to, again, welcome any questions while also sharing that transition planning with different goals, experiences, and concerns are all valid, especially when they come from the family. If the question that you have moves outside the scope of what we can fully address today, we'll try to point you in the right direction or get back to you. And we definitely welcome any comments, questions, emails that you may want to send our way. So thank you for being here and for engaging in this conversation and for the work that you're already doing to support your students.
Yeah, Tara or Tara, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tara. I'm sorry for not having my video on. I have been ill, so I'm trying to save you all from seeing that.
There's the season.
That's right.
First, I just want to say thank you very much. I am an assistant professor of instruction at the University of Northern Iowa in special ed, and I am, as of December 15th, ABD at the University of Iowa in special education and neuroscience. And so good luck to you guys. And if you need any help, let me know. There are some fabulous tools out there, especially when you go to do your lit review, which is a nightmare. That said, as Sarah knows, I saw that. But I teach transition to future educators, and the first time I taught it was last spring, and I taught in special ed, and I was a secondary teacher for many years prior to going into higher ed. And so when I got this class, I was really excited because I've written a lot of transition IEPs. And when we got to know each other, everybody in the class was an elementary ed student.
Oh,
And I was like, oh, okay. What? Okay. So, and they were like, why do we need to know this? Of course. And so, boy, you talk about having to pivot and do some things quickly. So I wanted to come tonight because I wanted to just kind of get anybody's any ideas or any thoughts you might have on how I might make a transition class more applicable with elementary students and for my elementary ed teachers. So that's my question.
I think
Yeah.
that's so funny too, because I mean, even we had the assumption of transition from high school to post-secondary life. So I think that even from grade to grade, what is the difference between the grades? And especially for those in the upper elementary moving to middle school or junior high, that is a great transition time to really think about, okay, what are those teachers in the middle school or junior high going to be expecting? And you were going to add something like
Yeah, I was just going to add too, especially depending on the student, you can start with those independent living skills really early. Even if it's as simple as knowing how to tie their shoe and knowing how to gather their materials when they need to go to math class. So that it can be expanded for sure, especially like I said, depending on the eligibility of the student and things like that. IEP goals can be written like that for young children too, for independent living skills. Um, so yeah, I think just making it clear to the teachers that research and academia right now is pushing toward these transition conversations starting way earlier. And I think that's kind of the way that we're moving, which is exciting to see. So yeah, I would say just letting your students know this is where we're heading this way, is recognizing that we need to be having these conversations sooner and when the students are younger. So it's actually a great opportunity for them to be learning about it.
Yeah, we also have in Iowa our different strats. So some of them are K-12. And so, and then
Mhm.
the other thing I told them last year was, you know, you may, um, you may think you're going to be in elementary ed, but you might get hired.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Take
Yeah,
what you can
yeah.
get. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so and we too, I threw it in the chat. We start at 14. So some of them, for the middle schoolers. So I think what I might do, I always have them write IEP goals. And so maybe I'll have them write IEP goals based on those things, right? Rather than more, that I use for my diverse learners, which is, reading, writing, math, behavior, things like that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and
um
we
Think
want to
that
make sure that we're talking about where they want to go and where they should be, but also who do they want to be? So not only the logistics, but also that self-determination. We had a talk from Michael Waymeyer, and he said it's not just about giving the child choices. It's about having them
Mhm.
be more aware and thoughtful about who they want their identity to be, uh,
mm.
and how to advocate, not just pick between two choices. So that's a great idea for transition planning as well.
I think that focusing, oh, I think I froze. Just really a lot of what Millie was saying, and even in her slides about that cultivation of those early skills and how that leads to these bigger, skills and that cultivation of those skills that students are going to need when they do transition out of high school. Just I guess more of the framing of that, like if we scaffold the self-advocacy, the self-determination, independence, executive functioning, belonging in peer relationships, even in kindergarten, even in
Mm.
preschool,
Hmm.
they'll have so much more practice with that as they, go through that K-12 trajectory. So I feel like somebody said in the chat, the earlier the better. And yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, these are all the skills, right? Like transition doesn't just happen like, okay, you're ninth grade now, let's talk about it. It's
Right.
that whole cultivation.
Well, and I also tell them, I say you need to get your students at their IEP meetings.
Hmm.
Even, I mean, and depending on, but for the most part, teaching them that self-advocacy early,
Yeah.
and teaching them about their IEP, right, and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate the information, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
good
And
luck in your program.
Thank
I know
you.
myself too, as a content area educator, I really relied so much on my special educator co-teachers because I knew nothing. I mean, I even for the transition process, I knew that as a mom, I could have my kid at the transition meeting, but why? It took one of my friends to tell me what's the purpose of my kid being there because they're not going to open their mouth anyway.
What I love to tell my students especially my middle schoolers, when I fell down, bumped my head, and taught middle school for 2 years. But I used, and they wouldn't want to go. And I'd say, well, we're making decisions for you. Would you like to be part of that? Would you like to,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and really get them involved in that? I know my children couldn't stand me because I made them go to their parent teacher conferences.
Mhm.
They did not have an IEP, but anyway.
Well,
Well, thank you guys very much. I'm
Thank
gonna jump
you.
off of here, but if
Feel
I
better.
thank you, and if hopefully you don't mind if I email you if I think about something and run it.
Yeah, we can switch to the next slide. We have our email addresses there.
Okay.
Please reach out.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. And again, reach out to me. Covenants is going to be your best friend, and
That's
lots of
Yes.
great.
other
Awesome.
Like
other.
Libby knows all about that.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
All right. Unfortunately, we are at the end. Thank you all so much for joining us. I have taken notes, and there were a couple questions in the chat. Kayla and I had a very similar question in terms of resources. So I know that Ruby shared three particular websites, but if there are any additional resources that we can share with the participants that might help facilitate some of these different activities that you have suggested, I can include that in the notes as well, and that would be wonderful.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's great. I
Yep.
can
Get that to
I'll
you.
come up with a list of some more things, especially I saw Kayla, your question about community agencies. So I'll come up with a list of some more things for that. And so you guys can get that.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to end the meeting, but thank you all very much. Thank you to our presenters and thank you to all of our participants for joining in. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.